Hello there, and welcome to the Meaningful Stitch. I'm Amy Palco, and I'm coming to you from Edinburgh, Scotland, and this is a mini episode which is following in a series tracking my progress on the Westnitz MKAL 2024, which is called GoGo Dynamo. I shared my first mini episode last week. This mini episode is coming to you a little bit later than intended because I spent the weekend up in the Scottish Highlands doing lots of walking and not as much knitting. So I was playing catch up on Wednesday, trying to make sure that I was all ready for the third clue coming out, which has now come out this morning. But before I begin on that, I wanted to share with you my progress from clue 2. So needless to say, there will be spoilers in this particular episode. So if you don't want to see what happens in clue 2, then maybe pause and come back another time. As I did in the first mini episode, I wanted to share with you a card that I had drawn for clue 2. I'm drawing a card from the Witch Sister Tarot deck by Julia Jeffrey. She is a wonderful Scottish artist and illustrator who's created a few tarot decks. This is absolutely one of my complete favourites at the moment that I'm drawing from for a lot of times for both my professional and my personal practice. The card that I drew this week, which I can show you now, is this beautiful card here, which is the Seven of Waters. Look at that gorgeous cormorant. We do sometimes see cormorants here. I live right by the harbour, right by the North Sea, and so we do sometimes see cormorants. They are known as the ravens of the sea, which I think is rather fabulous. So I'm going to read you a little bit from the guidebook before exploring how I think this is showing up in my knitting and in my practice. Cloaked against the storms of winter and veiled in fishermen's nets, this untamed witch woman can not only change her form, but also she can move between elements with ease and powerful grace. Her bright eyes are keen, and she fears not the unknown depths. With her wild sisters, she is free to soar through the storm or plunge headlong beneath the waves, unconstrained by earthly ties. The cowrie shells that adorn her veil symbolize abundance and good fortune. The Seven of Waters speaks of challenges overcome and of a true community of like-spirited companions. The Seven of Waters tells us that our witch sisters are with us, and together we are unstoppable. So there was quite a lot there that I felt really resonated with this week's clue. The movement from one element to another with grace, as we're moving from one clue to the next. One new technique is introduced following another, and actually what is then created is a coherent piece of fabric. It's not these kind of bits and pieces that are kind of sitting uncomfortably next to one another, but instead they're making a really beautiful, coherent and consistent piece of fabric. The other thing that I thought was, my own experience of knitting this, moving from the more sort of modular knitted clue 1 and then into these kind of broader, longer rows certainly, and moving into things like the brioche and the bubbles. There was a coherency and consistency of the knitting practice for me. There was a fluency and a fluidity. I really enjoy brioche, and there was a brioche section that you could do in this particular clue. You could swap it out for eyelets. I did not do that because as soon as I saw it was brioche, I was very happy. And that's because I really love doing brioche. The very first brioche pattern that I ever knitted, and I knitted it specifically because I didn't know how to do brioche and I wanted to learn how, was actually a Stephen West pattern. It was the Askews shawl. I do not recommend that as a starter project. That said, Stephen's instructions are always very, very clear, and he has some wonderful video tutorials. But yes, starting your first brioche project with a brioche tab was somewhat of a challenge. And I ripped it out many times before finally kind of getting going with it. And yes, that's still a shawl that I wear a lot today. Another shawl that I wear a lot, which also has some brioche elements in it, is this one here. This was the Westnitz MKAL of 2019. It's called Starflake. It's the only other one that I can think of that was a two, or in recent years certainly, that was a two-colour shawl like the one we're currently knitting, and it had this big lovely garter brioche section that I just so enjoyed. I remember knitting that actually while I was over in the Netherlands. We were over for a conference, and I think that was our last foreign trip before all of the restrictions came through for COVID the following year. So it kind of then became this real sort of shining point for me, this point where the world still felt very open and expansive, and I could go out and I could knit in cafes and hotel receptions, and it all felt very otherworldly, I think, while we're moving through 2020 and 2021. So this actually has a lot of lovely positive memories for me that are kind of really woven in. And that's one of the wonderful things I think about our knitting is that, is that we do weave in these stories and these memories, these moments of time when we were working on these particular projects, what we were thinking, what we were feeling, what we were moving through at the time. It's like our knitting holds a record of that, and I think it's very powerful and very potent because of that. This current project will hold for me some wonderful memories about this past weekend when we went up to Pitlochry, which is a beautiful town next to Foscally Loch. And every year they run a charity event which is called the Enchanted Forest. It runs for the month of October, and basically it's a lot of illuminations and art installations throughout Foscally Woods, and it was completely magical. I was genuinely enchanted. I didn't really know what to expect, but we so enjoyed it. It was absolutely wonderful. So if you get a chance to go, please do. I took quite a lot of video footage, so I'll be sharing that in an upcoming episode of The Meaningful Stitch really soon. I also took lots of footage of some of our beautiful walks that we went on. Autumn is really beginning to set in here, so the trees are all beginning to change, and it's looking really beautiful. So we went on quite a few walks, and I shared, and I took my camera along so I could share that with you also. But all of that is also woven into my knitting. We stayed in a inn that's been there since 1695, so a long time, and we ate a couple of times in the restaurant there, which is in the old building, not in the newer extensions. And every evening I would take my knitting down with me, and I would work away on these clues, so on the second clue. So I want to show you my progress. Before I do that, I'll just remind you what my yarn is. I am working with Ginger Twist Sheepish sock, and this is in the colour Poison Apple, and this is in the colour Lallybroch. This is my main colour, this is my contrast colour. It's a non-superwash BFL nylon base, 80/20. And this time round in this clue, Stephen invited us to add in a mohair dare. So I pulled out some mohair from my stash. This is actually mohair that I used in shawlography, which was, gosh, that must have been 2021, was it? 2020 maybe, MKAL. So I added that in, so I've just popped it in, my leftovers in there. This is some Drops Kidsilk in the colour Dark Rose that I have some leftover from my Hokey Locatelli Like a Cloud cardigan. And I had this full ball here of Kremke Silky Kid in this gorgeous kind of burnt orange colour. So I had some options. I had more options, and this is what I narrowed it down to. I had some options, so I had a bit of a think, and I decided that I did want to do the brioche, and I wanted to choose a colour that was more, again, lower contrast, and rather than introducing another colour. So I went with the dark rose, and this is what it looks like. So again, it's very, very long, and so it's quite difficult to see. But there you see, there's clue 1, the kind of modular knitting with the stockinette and reverse stockinette, and the first row of the bubbles. And then this clue 2 was these two brioche sections and 2 bubble rows, which doesn't look like a huge amount, but when you're working with as many stitches as we are at this point, and I think when we cast off, when we finished clue 2, we were over 400 stitches. So we are dealing with a lot of stitches on the needle and very long rows here. But I'm really pleased with the result. So you can see that I've held 1 strand of mohair rather than 2. There you go. And that's on the wrong side of the work. So you can see there's my brioche with the single strand of dark rose Drops Kidsilk. So again, this was we had these moments where we're having to drop our stitches to create these bubble rows, which is always an interesting time. And yes, the other thing I would say too about the brioche and the way that I do my brioche is that I'm a thrower rather than a picker in my knitting style. But when I do two-handed colour work, I throw with one hand and I pick with the other. When I do my brioche pearls by throwing, and I do my brioche knits with picking. And the reason why I do that is because when I do brioche knits with throwing, it means that I'm consistently having to bring my yarn forward on my needle. So it's kind of creating this action with this finger, which is then creating an issue in my wrist, which then creates an issue with my arm. And so if I do a lot of brioche when I'm throwing my brioche knits, then I end up with quite a lot of pain. However, I have discovered that if I do brioche knits by picking, then I can alternate that and I don't get the same kind of pain because it's not the same kind of action. So if you're finding that brioche knitting is causing you pain and you're a thrower, then you might want to try the brioche picking, particularly just for the brioche knits. The brioche pearls, your yarn is already at the front of your work, so you're not having to bring it back and forth. But when you're doing the brioche knits, it really does kind of set up this particular action, which for me and my knitting style causes pain. But I think there are ways to mitigate that and manage that, and obviously taking rests and bringing in support and help as and when that's required. But certainly for me, now that I'm brioche knitting in that style, I don't have any problems. The only thing I would say is when I started doing that, I did notice that there was quite a big difference in my tension between when I threw and when I picked. So my picking is a lot looser than my throwing. But over the years and over the many brioche projects that I have embarked upon, that's really evened out. So the other piece that I would say about Clue 2 is that I had the opportunity to be a special guest on the Humans of West Knits MKAL Zoom call hosted by Irina of Fibre Chats and Martyn of Knit 365, which are also channels here on YouTube which you could go and check out. So they are basically hosting a series of Zooms where people who are embarking upon the MKAL can join in and share their progress and give each other tips and show how they're getting on with it and discuss ideas and predictions for what comes next. So that is recorded and it is now available. So you can go and watch that on YouTube just now. I will leave a link to that in the description box below. But one of the things that it really reminded me of, particularly with the Seven of Waters card, was that, this is a community event. We are all in this together. We are a lovely and supportive community that are exploring these various different techniques, and we're getting to see each other's progress and cheer one another on. And that's a really lovely thing, and that really does make you feel, I think, in these MKALs, that anything is achievable. So even when we come across a new technique that might feel a little bit bewildering, with Stephen's YouTube tutorials and the kind of support and really kind of clear demonstration that those offer, coupled with the wonderful motivation and encouragement that you receive through knitting with fellow knitters, it really makes you feel as though you can really go that extra mile and dive to these depths that perhaps you didn't think were achievable before. So my loves, I'm going to leave you now because I'm going to go and start on clue 3, which is just dropped this morning, and yes, it looks really interesting. I'll say no more about it just now, but I will share the next mini episode next week. And yeah, in the meantime, if you are knitting on this MKAL, please do get in touch and let me know how you're getting on. Let me know how you found clue 2, and how your yarn choices are working out for you, whether you've chosen a mohair dare. And even if you're not participating in the MKAL, perhaps the Seven of Waters card really spoke to you and your experience of knitting and feeling like we can go together through these various different elements of our knitting practice when we're supported by fellow knitters. Okay, my loves, take good care, and I will speak to you really soon.